All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 71. My name is Bob Akayeri, and tonight we're going to be talking Division III football with our guests who are already here. That's awesome, actually. Here, let me go ahead and add our guests. We've got two people joining us, and let me go ahead and get them. There we go. And I accidentally clicked wrong. There we go. All right. We get good at this
Hey, guys.
the further we go along. Hey, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. And Frank,
Yeah, absolutely.
that other guy.
Yeah, and I just saw him come up too. So again, this is RCFB Talk 71. My name's Bob Akayeri. We're going to be joined by Frank Rossi and JB of In the D3 Football Huddle. You guys are now in your 15th season as a podcast. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's true. It's funny when you were asking us sort of off the air about whether or not we should do callers. I mean, that's how I originally got introduced to Frank, because I called into the first ever In the Huddle show back in 2008, I think. And we kind of hit it off from there and eventually became co-hosts. And yeah, 15 seasons later, 340 episodes almost, we're still at it.
That's great. That's awesome. And Frank, by the way, I just wanted to say welcome up.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the work that you guys do. And we're thankful for the promotion you do on some of our videos and different posts along the way, because you guys could easily focus just on FBS and FCS football, but you do go out of your way to give promotion to Division III, and we do applaud that.
Absolutely. I mean, we enjoy Division III. We enjoy all levels of football, but D3 is its own kind of, it's fun. It's interesting. There's so many teams. There's such variety at a level that you don't see, I think, at the other divisions. In a way, it's almost like when you talk to people who follow, college football, and you ask them why they might like it more than the NFL, which is obviously going on right now. You usually hear things like, oh, the variety, the teams are different. You see things that you don't typically see at the pro level because everyone's kind of doing similar things, at least compared to the wild differences in college football. But they're usually referring to just, the FBS. But the further down you go, especially when you get to Division III, where you have all these schools with very different approaches, like Martin Luther College in, New Ulm, Minnesota, has to come up with a completely different approach with the type of students they pull in versus a school like, you get the Coast Guard or Maritime, There's several. I know I just used a school name that's got several, but you've got Merchant Marine, you've got schools like that. So there's so much variety just across the board that you see a lot of things that you typically wouldn't see, and just it's a little more pure. I personally was over at, and I know you guys. I know Frank, you were down at Mary HardinBaylor's game this weekend, weren't you?
I was indeed. In fact, I see our friend Alvy King as a listener tonight, father of Kyle King, the quarterback down there, who had a phenomenal night with 6 touchdowns down in Belton versus number 11 Muhlenberg. Number 1 Mary HardinBaylor wins 62-13. So, I mean, what an opening night for Mary HardinBaylor. But somebody commented to me on Sunday, a friend from another school, I watched the first half of that game, and that's just not a D3 team in their book. Well, as you said, there are such differences in the approaches and the views of how to work these programs across the 240 teams in Division III that you are going to see things very different from school to school.
And there are so many teams. I mean, now they're 240. Who's the latest school again? I mean, the 240, it starts this season.
Well, there have been a couple of schools that have been joining in the last year or so. Hilbert is finally starting to play some games. They actually have a game on Saturday against Denison. They're in Western New York outside Buffalo. Eastern University is starting up a program. I think they're on the outside of Philadelphia. So there's been a few new schools kind of getting into D3, and there's been a few schools in the last 5 to 10 years who've come online, like Hendricks down in Arkansas. Mary HardinBaylor is only about 20 or 25 years old as a program, so they're relatively new. I mean, there's a lot of colleges out there like Frank and mine who were established in the late 17, early 1800s that have been playing football for over 100 seasons. But there have been a lot of schools in the last, 15, 20 years, I think, especially with the advent of, you've seen some kind of general declines of college age, boys going to school. Football is a great way to offset that. So a lot of small liberal arts colleges across the country have added football, and they're looking for those 70 to 100 plus guys to join their roster. It's a great way for enrollment management to help the school out.
Gentlemen, that kind of actually leads to a question I would have. What would you say is the state of D3 football in 2022? Because obviously 2020 was a bit of a wash, and then 2021 they were coming back online. Do you feel like we're back to a level that we were in 2019, or has it even changed beyond that?
We have some definite anomalies, if I can start, James, on this, because and we've been pointing it out. I attended 2 games last weekend. You pointed out the Crew game in Belton, Texas, but also the Merchant Marine game versus FDU Florham. And one of the things that was readily apparent was that Merchant Marine's a team that can't take on fifth-year seniors. It's just not how the academy works. And so with all these fifth-year seniors across the country being allowed because of the COVID year not counting and everything, there's definitely a change of landscape for schools that were able to get folks to come on for a 5th year. And that's going to be a situation for this year and next year as well. I think that affects the division more than it will in the future, clearly. So we are definitely a different division because of it. Doesn't mean that teams are coming out of nowhere because of it, although we've seen a couple teams surprise, and maybe we'll get to that later over the last year or so. But overall, we're just seeing that teams that have a lot of 5th years coming back because of these rule changes, thanks to COVID, have definitely gotten an advantage. And this is the year I'm feeling like you're going to see that advantage manifest itself the most. JB, what are you thinking?
Well, I think there was a little bit of a have and have not type of situation with spring football. And, ultimately, Mary HardinBaylor really benefited, I think, from their 5-game spring season. They had a new starting quarterback. They had a new offensive line. They had a lot of new parts to that team that really got to gel in that spring season. And I think they really carried over into the fall. We saw most of the spring football was really in kind of the Midwest and the Southeast. Nothing really on the West Coast, with the exception of the Northwest Conference up in Oregon and Washington State, but they did a couple of games. And then we saw a very small handful of Pennsylvania and other teams get a chance to play spring football. So I think that it didn't create an unlevel playing field, but I do feel like the teams and the schools that were able to embrace and find ways to play in the spring. And even there were a handful of teams that got to play a couple of fall games during 2020. Trine University stands out. They made the concerted effort to actually play some games, and I think in the long run, in this season, maybe we'll see that come into effect. We'll see.
That's some really interesting insight, and that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't really thought about that, especially as you said, some of these programs typically weren't even set up to deal with fifth year players, which you see a lot more of, obviously, with the money that gets at stake with potential, in the FBS. It seems also like, because I've been loosely familiar with D3. I've gotten a lot more familiar with it, I would say, in the last several years, particularly as I've helped with our CFB. But I remember, obviously, we went through that almost, it was a little over a decade where there was basically a duopoly of Mount Union and Wisconsin Whitewater that reigned there for a while. What, for those who aren't
more than a decade.
Yeah, I think it was definitely more than that. But what led to that? For people who are not as familiar with D3, what was going on in those years that they kind of continued to be the pinnacle of the sport? And why have we been able to see that? I don't know if I'm overstating it, but I know obviously because 2019 went to North Central, 2021 went to Mary HardinBaylor, and they did as well back in 2017, although unofficially now. But what led to that era where those two were the peak, and why have we been able to see these other teams climb up since then?
I think to start, how did we get there in the first place? I think the Rowans of the world and some of the other teams back in the 90s were able to spur this idea that if you were willing to take risks with admissions for your football teams and have a deep roster in the process, that you put yourself head and shoulders above the rest of the division. And I think that's what Mount Union saw with Larry Karras back in the 90s. That's when his time really started, getting that team up and running in the way that we know it today. And I think Whitewater followed suit when Lance Leipold took over. It was already in the throes of making those changes, and it continued under his tutelage. And my first Stag Bowl on the sidelines was their first win against Mount Union in the Stag Bowl. So it should tell you, it takes time to create these transitions in the balance of power in Division III. Then you look at what Mary HardinBaylor has done, but their story actually starts in the early 2000s, because as a very, very fledgling program, they did get to the top of the heap, but did not win the Stag Bowl back then. And then it took some years to sort of get back there, but they too saw, if you go deep enough on your depth chart of talent and strength, and even transfers to a certain degree, etc., you will win as a program in Division III. North Central, same thing. I believe that they're watching each other and realizing if they can get to their president's office and their admissions office and sell them on this idea. Look, a strong football team gives us a strong campus, a strong alumni base, a strong everything. And the crew, if you look at their growth and expansion over the last decade at the school itself, you'll see what the fruits of the D3FB labor have been for the Crusaders football team and for the school ultimately. There is something to it, but not every school is willing to take that risk. And I think that's the problem here, is that a lot of schools assume that you can just do it on a 100-man roster. No, you can't. I'm sorry to tell you, you probably can't.
Yeah, and even to take it another step, and Frank got a great interview out of Utica University head coach Blaise Fagiano in our Region 2 preseason show. He got to go down to the Stag Bowl, go up, I guess, or over from Utica over to Ohio. But, he got to see it firsthand. I mean, the roster sizes, the number of full-time coaches, which is also a definite thing that's not exactly fair across all Division III. There's a lot of part-timers. There's a lot of grad assistants that are, working for peanuts basically to kind of build their resumes and to, because they love the game. But for the most part, most of these, colleges or universities like UMHB, NCC, and the others that are really competing for national championships like Mount Union and Whitewater, their whole institution has gone all in on football. They have the financial support, they have the alumni support, they have the student support. I mean, 15,000 people show up for some of these games out in Wisconsin. There's going to be a huge game between UMHB and Whitewater this weekend. They might even hit 20,000 people in that stadium. It's going to be insane. And that part of the country, especially the Midwest, has a huge high school football focus. Those games are always super well attended, and it's just a bigger deal than it is in certain parts of the United States. So I think you can see a direct correlation between the programs that are successful in Division III to the same thing that you see at the high school, kind of high school level. And where I'm based in Florida, there really aren't any D3 programs. So it's kind of a different story. And so a lot of D3 kids end up coming, get recruited out of here. Frank's alma mater, Union College, his former head coach, John Odino, was one of the first guys that was really recruiting down here. And now I think a lot more teams and programs have been recruiting down here in Florida, because there is a lot of high school talent and not everyone can play for the Gators or for the Seminoles. So a lot of interesting stuff that's evolved, but at the end of the day, it comes down to resources and the schools being all in on football.
That's a really great point. I remember a few years ago, well, more than a few years ago, I went down to Dallas, Fort Worth, and interviewed the head coach who was restarting an NAIA team over at Texas Wesleyan. And he said he had called some of his colleagues around the country who had moved from he was a high school coach, to jumping up to taking on a program. And he said all of them told him, make sure you're going with the school that really wants to go in on football. Because a couple of them, and I'm not going to name the schools he named, although he did, he's like they were just flopping around because the school had added football, but really wasn't going in all in on it, and they weren't able to really build much of a foundation to be competitive. As you've said, those programs have. On a lighter note, and I just want to mention before because I do enjoy where we're going with this conversation. I just wanted to bring up one light topic: the Golden Glazer. One of the things I love about Division III football. I mean, all of college football. I mean, I live now in Minnesota, so I'm used to seeing, the little brown jug, the pig between Iowa and Minnesota, Floyd of Rosedale, which if you say Floyd of Rosedale, if you don't know it's a pig, you might not know that. But heck, in D3, they've got the troll that's between Concordia and St. Olaf. But now there's going to be a donut, a literal, I don't know if it's bronze, but a donut trophy between, Wisconsin
metal.
Lutheran and Carroll?
Yeah, that game is also this weekend, and it is one of the funnier trophies that I've seen. But Frank's alma mater and their crosstown rival RPI fight over Dutchman's shoes. So there's all sorts of cool rivalry trophy games. There's the Monin Bell, Frank. There's a little brass bell. There's so many different rivalry trophies and unique ones. It's really a fun part of D3 for sure.
What are your favorites? I mean, you mentioned a few. Frank, how about yourself? I mean, I know you have ties to Union. You call their games for many years, but what are some of your favorite D3 trophies?
In terms of the games I've attended or want to attend, honestly, obviously Dutchman's shoes. I would be excommunicated from Union if I denied that, or chased out of RPI this weekend when I go see the Carnegie Mellon game and cover that. But on top of that, Cortica, I've never been to the Cortica Jug game. And this year it's going to be held at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. And I'm going to go. I'm telling everybody in advance that weekend, there's going to be no poll, no decision to be made. It's going to be Cortica at Yankee Stadium since I have New York City ties over the last 20 years. The Secretary's Cup game is our Army-Navy game, essentially. And it takes special, I would say, precedence for me because in the fall 2020 very, very, very abbreviated season we had where we only had like 6 games played. One of the games was Coast Guard at Merchant Marine Academy. And aside from ESPN and their ESPN3 crew, I was one of the only members of the media allowed on campus based on what we've done for the schools to promote that game, to promote their academies over the last 15 years, essentially. And they showed us how much they appreciated that. So that's kind of a sentimental favorite for me after how we got treated in this whole process.
Oh, that's great that they did that. And I think we always like to have a little bit of fun with trivia with some of our people on our CFB who use the Reddit site, but also on Twitter. And the fact that there are those 2 Division III service academies, I think aren't as well known. And it's a shame because it's exciting and it's fun stuff. And I've enjoyed the coverage you guys have done on, at Kings Point about what's going on down there. Pulling it into this season, where I was actually in the press box at St. John's this past Saturday. I had to cover that as soon as I found out Whitewater was coming to town because that's, that was a huge game. It was number 4 versus number 5. But
absolutely,
you two obviously have had a chance to look across the entire spectrum of Division III. I've enjoyed, the Crunch Time video. I actually watched your latest one earlier today, and I recommend that. By the way, we'll give them a chance to pimp their stuff a little bit at the end of the show. But I just want to say, I do enjoy the videos and the podcast they put out. So I recommend it. But setting that aside, after this first week, where are we right now in the Division III scene from your view?
Kind of in an unusual spot because of the number of high-quality games that we're seeing in the out-of-conference schedule. I mean, that Muhlenberg game last week against Mayor HardinBaylor on top of the UW versus St. John's game in week 1. And there were others out there. We had some really good appetizers here for this season, but these appetizers, because of the way Division III works, are actually very, very consequential games because if you lose a game in your out-of-conference schedule, you must win your conference. Let's say 99% of the time, you must win your conference if you're in that position because there are only 5 at-large bids still to be had by 240 teams out there. So realistically, 8-2 teams very infrequently now are able to get in. It's not impossible, but 8-2 teams that need at-large bids, I should say, very rarely get in. Not impossible, but it's going to be tough. So a Whitewater team right now is behind the 8 ball. If they were to lose this weekend to HardinBaylor, there's no chance they get in unless they win the WIAC or WIAC, depending on where you come from and how you pronounce it, the WIAC, as Coach Bolus calls it. But that's the thing. These great appetizer games are actually maybe changing the balance of power a little bit for what our playoffs will look like at the end of the season. And, when you see a Trinity Wheaton game coming up, you saw that Huntingdon Linfield game, which was really close. And I know the humidity bothered Linfield, but at the same time, both teams had to play in it. And so realistically, you see the score, and that's pretty much what you're going to take away from that game, 41-34. These games will have an effect in some way, shape, or form on how the playoffs form. And it's a little bit more, I would say, like I started, as consequential this year than I felt in previous years the first 2 weeks were.
Yeah, and there's going to be even another big slate of good games this weekend. North Central is going to Wabash. Huntington has to play Birmingham Southern. That game will have a huge impact on how the bracket gets put together, particularly now as we've seen the rise of some of these southeastern, southwestern teams in Texas and Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, et cetera. Wheaton Trinity is a huge game, number 8 versus number 9, I think. That could be a game that if Trinity wins and then runs the table in the SAA, could put them in the conversation as like a potential 1 or 2 seed, depending on how they fare for the rest of the year. There's other interesting games. George Fox is flying out from the Northwest down to play in Howard Payne in Texas. We obviously have UMHB Whitewater. River Falls is going to St. John's. I mean, that team has been winning games, and they were 3rd place in the WIAC last year. Chicago Illinois College is a good rivalry game. UW Stout versus Wartburg. So there's some really great action coming up, and Rockport Ithaca is also happening this Saturday. 2 of the better teams in upstate New York, Carnegie Mellon, RPI, Rowan versus Springfield. No shortage. It's been a really fun start to the D3 season.
Have there been any surprises for either of you in week 1?
We talked about that on our last show, didn't we, Frank? Why don't you go?
I'm going to stick to it. I know I've got Cat Dome football watching, and a parent or 2 of Linfield Wildcats out there. But it was still disappointing to see them walk away with only a 1-touchdown win against Huntingdon, because I don't necessarily think Huntingdon is going to be the winner of the USA South. Brevard moves over. Excuse me, not Brevard, but help me out. Thank you, Belhaven. I knew it was a B. It's been a long day. Belhaven moves over to the USA South. This is why we work well together, Bobick. See, but Belhaven moves over to the USA South and could very well win it. And Linfield is supposed to be a top-tier team, and to win it by only 1 touchdown, they're gonna have to do better than that. They've got to make sure that they can be ready for the playoffs. Ultimately, we saw a Salisbury team last year that was flat-footed because nobody in their conference provided, I think, the level of competition Wesley used to before their program got taken over and relegated to non-existence, basically. You need good challenges. You need to perform well in those good challenges to be ready for the playoffs in Division III. So Linfield doesn't have, I don't think, huge challenges in the Northwest Conference coming up if Whitworth plays the way they did against Carnegie Mellon, for instance. They need to use these out-of-conference games that they have to really get themselves ready. And that was a disappointment and a surprise at the same time for me last week. Otherwise, the script was pretty much according to plan, except Rochester almost pulled off something against Utica that we would not have necessarily expected in upstate New York. And Utica pulled it out in the end, but that was getting a little too close for comfort for some folks.
Yeah, and I would just add that the way Whitewater played against St. John's was surprising to me. I mean, committing 7 turnovers, all the missed safety snaps. I mean, some of the special teams play in week 1 was pretty bad. It's exciting when you see guys run it back for 90-something yards on a kickoff return, but you don't expect a team and a program as polished as UW to commit 7 turnovers I mean, some of that you have to give St. John's defense some credit, but at the same time, that's very uncharacteristic for a team that is typically expected to compete for a national championship year in and year out. That to me was probably the biggest surprise. I picked Whitewater to win that game. I thought based on last season and who they had coming back, that they would be a potential favorite there. They did not look great, and that's kind of a surprise in the fact that now that they could be looking at 0-2, because honestly, I would view Mary HardinBaylor as at least a 2-touchdown, maybe 17-plus point favorite in that game. The way they looked against Muhlenberg and the way Whitewater looked last weekend, I think Mary HardinBaylor might really pound them this Saturday.
Yeah, I admit I went into that game expecting a little bit more as a less sophisticated D3 fan or knowledgeable person on it. And it's funny you mentioned that because I remember the opening points were a safety that was basically an unforced error on a shotgun snap. But they have Whitewater has a good kicker. That Nathan Custer had a heck of a leg.
Yeah.
I remember I was in the press box and we were all like, whoa, every time he kicked the ball. And I don't know, in that second half, they brought out a sophomore running back, Tamir Thomas, who clearly took St. John's by surprise. He had a couple of crazy runs there before I think the defense finally started to corral him a bit there. But that was, I think, promising. We didn't see him in the first half at all. So I don't know if he was something with the coaches or what, or if they just, decided to rotate in somebody later. But I see a lot of positive for them. I'm looking forward to seeing how they do. But yeah, I agree. Mary HardinBaylor, after seeing how they did in their game, I'm not sure that's gonna quite be enough.
Bobak, I'll tell you one thing, though. One thing that always concerns me, and it used to concern me when I was more of an FBS watcher than I am these days, is when I used to see the Florida State-Miami game in week 1 on Labor Day when they were trying the whole Monday football approach with it back when. And it was such a subpar version of the rivalry game because in week 1, you just don't see the best of a lot of teams. And you can get away with that in Division I, but it was disappointing to waste a rivalry game in that manner when they were doing that. And they eventually got rid of that idea and put it back into the midseason where it belongs, I think. I think when you do this in Division III, the only risk you take ultimately is, as I said earlier, you are defining ultimately who you are or what you are in the eyes of a committee that may have to either pick you to be in the playoffs at all or seed you in those playoffs. And we're basing a lot of things on a game 1 where you may not be getting the best product from teams. And again, I understand Linfield. I'm not trying to pick on them, but that 1 touchdown win may not be characteristic of who they are because they were getting out a lot of cobwebs maybe in week 1. They're trying to find the right personnel, like you're saying Whitewater may have been trying to do. I don't believe week 2 Whitewater loses by those 2 to 3 touchdowns that JB's saying. I think this could be closer somewhere into a 14-7 type of game because they have the depth on defense to nullify some of the weapons or many of the weapons on offense for Mary HardinBaylor, and that is the strength of Mary HardinBaylor. Their defense gave up 400 yards to Muhlenberg very quietly on Saturday night, and that's one of those things where you kind of look at the numbers and you're like, this is going to be a better game than some people are thinking. Do I think Whitewater wins it? No. Do I think Mary HardinBaylor learns a lot about themselves in this game? Yeah, because I don't think they learned too much about themselves in that Muhlenberg 62-13 route.
That makes sense. And, I should say that Whitewater defense was very strong. It shut down St. John's offense on the ground. Like, they got nothing going on the running game. I think they ended the day with far less than 100 yards on the ground. It was mostly in the air and mostly, They had obviously a couple of good receivers, but that senior tight end, Alex Larson, he's like one of those players where you're like, did no one else see him and throw a scholarship at him? Because he's like 6'7", 240 pounds, has got hands and athleticism.
He could be a
tight
late
end
bloomer.
at D3. And I'm like, wow, is he not going to get poached by and I could see why you'd say, St. John's is one of those colleges that, it's a lot of schools like to say that, but it's a special place. And I could see why some of their players would stick around when they might have an opportunity to go elsewhere for sure. I just want to do a quick station ID.
Sure, go ahead.
No, just a quick station ID. You're listening to RCFB Talk 71. My name's Bobak Hayeri. I am joined right now by two fellows, JB and Frank Rossi of in the division, in the D3 Huddle, which is a really good podcast. They're on their 15th season, almost 340 episodes, and we're talking Division 3 football. And by the way, maybe later on we'll try and get some of your calls as well if you have questions. But I know, JB, we're about to start speaking, and Frank too, so I'll let you guys go at it.
Go ahead, Frank.
Well, I was just going to bring up Brandon Jordan, a 6'6" receiver who also was playing special teams to block a punt and recover one for UMHB last week. You wonder where were the scouts on these guys when it was coming out of high school situation. These guys are incredible athletes with incredible attributes, and it's like, what's going on here with some of these guys? So,
well, I'm looking right now at my I have a couple of Ali Marpet autograph things, and he was only 240, 250 pounds when he enrolled as a freshman at Hobart. He was barely getting looks at from the Fordhams and other places in New York, and sometimes D3, especially when you get to the All-American caliber level player, they can tend to be a little bit of late bloomers. They may not have had the size, the speed, or whatever you need to get noticed as a FBS D1 athlete, but give them a couple of years in the right strength program and they sort of fill out, and all of a sudden you're like, holy smokes. But it's not an overnight thing. It can take a couple of seasons. And I think Brandon Jordan might be one of those cases where, he's from Santa Barbara, California. He kind of went more of the community junior college route, kind of blossomed a little late. And then now here he is, a clear All-American player. And if there's anyone that may have a shot at the NFL, I mean, every year there's maybe one or two guys from D3. We saw Josh, who we nicknamed Uno, from Framingham State. He made the final cut to the Seattle Seahawks roster this year. He was on our show a couple of years ago. So every year there's usually one or two guys from D3 who make it, and a lot of them I think are just sort of late bloomers. And that's kind of the beauty of the division in some respects.
One thing I've enjoyed, especially in the last several years with Division 3, are some of the rivalry games that have gone on a bigger stage. Obviously, here in the Twin Cities, I had an opportunity to cover the last Johnny's game, and we'll get to how that ended maybe in a later question. But in Allianz Field, and that was just spectacular in that MLS stadium to see it packed with those fan bases for that rivalry game. And we talked about the Cortaga Jug earlier as we were kind of talking. I think, Frank, you want to eventually cover that game. I know we were able to send a reporter when it was at MetLife Stadium, so that was also spectacular, just a big crowd, and it was great for that kind of environment, especially I think for those players. And I think that's what people don't realize is how exciting it is to play college football at that level and just be a part of that. I mean, I know obviously both of you know that. I know, JB, you played for Hobart. So, but the question I wanted to ask is, I also know broadcast quality is getting better on some of these games. You showed some of the highlights from Washington and Jefferson's win over John Carroll, and it looked really smooth. Is that something we're starting to see happen better? Because I mean, that's a joke. I know when we were talking with some of the folks who focus on NAIA, it's like the diagonal camera. Maybe having to wipe the glass of the.
Well, here's the funny thing. Not to interrupt, but we have in our 15th season run. We've gotten to know a lot of coaches, and some of them have stuck with Division 3. Some of them have moved up to D2, FCS, whatever you want to say. And I know a lot of people sometimes put D3 down as it's a glorified high school football, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, though, when you look at the quality of athlete, the true student athlete, and the facilities, I mean, most facilities at top D3 schools, the game that's going to go down between Carnegie Mellon and RPI, have you ever seen that stadium is hands down, beautiful. It's one of the best in the Northeast. What the Crusaders have in Belton is incredible. Most Division III schools have better facilities than upper division colleges, and they provide better educations, better alumni networking, better long-term, career and other support. So I know sometimes people say D3 isn't great football, but if you watch the games, that's not true. And most of the times, the degrees that you get, I mean, how many people would kill to have a degree from MIT? Come on. It's the facilities are just up there. I mean, it is really something that I think gets overlooked a lot of the time. And, the quality of the football is there too.
I'm going to say, though, on top of that, one of the reasons people are enjoying our coverage, and not to, self-plug, but this has been something over the last few years, especially since we went to video after the first decade essentially being an all-audio podcast, is that we're providing a coverage level that's giving an integrity to the division, especially at games that we're able to attend in person. I'll tell you a funny anecdote. Today, a streamer friend of mine on Twitch was doing a subathon, so he's been on for like 2 days straight, just about. And I was like, hey, well, why don't you show my podcast just for content? And they were literally, these are guys that have never seen a Division III game in their lives, watching Crunch Time, which is the highlights from the games, and critiquing the different, angles, broadcast qualities, etc. And you picked it out, Bob. The Washington and Jefferson one was one they loved. Absolutely. The games that I attended that I actually provided the video for, they were like, oh, that's incredible. It looks like the other games are done on a cell phone versus yours. And realistically, I'm doing them on a cell phone.
Yeah.
It's just, we know how to handle it in a certain way with angles and whatnot over the years. But, we love the ability to lend credibility and integrity to this division, and people appreciate it because not every school has the ability to do that. They can't all, give that level of, crisp video and coverage of every scoring play or something along those lines, and the interviews and all that stuff. So it works hand in hand. In the old days, D3Football.com, who I worked with, essentially, we were able to go out and broadcast audio at first that nobody else was doing, and then video when it was first on the cusp. But then everybody else was doing video. So what do we do at that point? At the end of the day, we came out there and we decided coverage, just general coverage like we're doing now, is what's needed out there. And nobody's told us to go away, essentially, since we started that coverage in that way. And we hope that we're lending that credibility and integrity to our division.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that, there is still an arms race at the D3 level. And to the extent, especially as these schools really do recruit from a national base, they have kids come in from all over the country. And, realistically, there's, ESPN isn't going to cover these games. So the better video quality that they can provide for the families, the fans, the alumni, it's a recruiting tool that attracts players and sets certain programs apart if they really can provide that package of, you can send your son cross country. You look at like a Linfield, for instance. I mean, they're recruiting guys from California and other, probably Texas and other parts of the country. Not a lot of families are going to be able to fly to those games, but if you have a really great video package, you can watch your son, and it's a really great experience.
So I want to go ahead and let in one of the callers that's been sort of hanging around just to mix it up. Trey, what's up? You've been really patient. What question do you have?
Hey, I'm really enjoying the conversation here on Division III. So I guess in the past 10 years, we've had two schools in my state of Arkansas revamp their programs, Lyon College and Hendrix College. And I think that was a recruitment tool for the colleges. Have you seen some schools that have either abandoned their programs and restarted them be successful? Or have you seen maybe some newer schools come about and be very successful at the Division III level? Anyway, I love y'all's conversation. Love this live stream.
Thanks, man.
Trey, thank you for that question and the observations. One thing right off the bat, and if you look at my photo with Micah Hackett, who is now an assistant coach, and he thanked me for putting him as my feature photo when he was on the sidelines Saturday. So Micah, hope all is well down there again. But Mary HardinBaylor is a program that started from nothing 25 years ago, as JB pointed out. And look at them now. I mean, they are in the conversation. I call them 3-time Stag Bowl winners. You can talk about 2016 all you want as being an all-of-the year, but the game happened. I attended it, so I don't know how I don't look at it as real. So in terms of startup programs, there's a real example of a program that came along and did what they did or doing what they're doing right now. In terms of teams that have come back out of thin air from, a history that after, stopping things or whatnot, normally, no. I can't think of a team like that, although we've seen teams come down from Division II and do okay. Springfield comes to mind in the 90s after being Division II. They came down to Division III and were in the conversation for a little while. So the Chris Sharps of the world became household names on ESPN for a little while when they did come down in the early 2000s. So there are possibilities in terms of teams moving around for that to happen, but you don't often see teams disappear, come back, and do things out of nowhere. Hendricks, I applaud them for what they're putting together for all intents and purposes. I'd like to see them continue to climb to give more integrity to the South in terms of football. I think the more teams in the South that excel, the better off we are as a division, because it used to be this little island down there. It was Mary HardinBaylor and Hardin-Simmons and nobody else. And now there's really credibility, and the spring season, I think, helped us realistically spot those teams and gave them the ability to showcase themselves a lot better. JB, you have anything?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some teams that have sort of faded out or come back, and nothing necessarily jumps to mind. Obviously Hendricks has had that New York Times article and stuff, and honestly, I'm just hoping that someday Coach Phillips sends me a black 36 jersey, because that would be really cool to add to my collection. But
size large.
Yeah, well, maybe XL. We'll see.
So for those who don't know, that was your number in your playing days, correct?
Am I really poor and nondescript career? Yes, but yeah, 36 was that one. But yeah, I'm trying to think. I know that there are some teams. I think about like Sewanee, for instance. They have really struggled the last few years. They got their first win in week 1 for the first time in like 4 years, if you factor out the COVID year. And so, that's something where you sometimes see programs that will kind of struggle and they'll dip a little bit, but I think eventually they'll find ways to turn things around. Ultimately, like we said at the top, the blueprint of how you do this is out there. It just depends on whether or not the school's administration, the presidents, the board of directors are really going to go in on football or not. That really decides a lot.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Trey. By the way, I always like to, one of the other fun trivia things is Sewanee was, of course, a member of the SEC back in the day as the University of the South. So, and now, very different universe. So was Tulane. So were a couple of other schools as well. One question I wanted to ask, and, we've had now several years. In hindsight, did the MEAC do the right thing with St. Thomas?
No. It's an embarrassment what they did. And we've known Coach Caruso. He's an Ithaca guy, so he's another upstate in New York type. Frank is an official upstate New York. He's in fact the mayor of a town in upstate New York. So Mayor
I
Rossi
forgot. Yes, congratulations, Frank.
Yeah, indeed.
Thanks, guys.
I'm just an alumni, but yeah, what the MIAC did was it was almost borderline despicable. It's a shame. I'm happy for them. They seem to have moved on and they're doing well in the FCS, kind of Pioneer League type situation. But yeah, no, you don't ever want to see a conference basically alienate somebody out. That would be like, the ASC doing the same thing to Mary HardinBaylor and saying like, hey, you know what, you guys are just too good. We don't want to play anymore, so you're done.
Yeah, and to elaborate on it, and it's kudos to St. John's for actually backing St. Thomas despite the rivalry and that entire vote situation back then.
For sure.
I want to make it clear that even though there was that bad blood, they knew enough not to go there, and complete credit. But look, if you can't win, then do something about it. But doing something about it doesn't mean kicking somebody out. It means do something about it on your turf in your own home. Don't do what they did. It is absolutely ridiculous. And it really reeks of this idea that is completely against the whole YD3 principle. I just don't get it. to this day, I don't get it. Look, Thomas More had their situation where they got kicked out essentially of their conference of the Pac because of what happened in women's basketball and other things along the way that basically really created a problem for the conference. While I don't love it, I understand that. That's not what happened at St. Thomas. And realistically, that conference still to this day, it reeks because of that whole thing. And Coach Caruso, to this day, I applaud you for how you handled it in a mature way. He was still a fan of D3 all the way through. We saw him down in Shenandoah. I took a picture of Greg Thomas and I from D3Football.com when things were on the outs with him in this conference. He still was a big fan of Division 3, even as Division 3 kind of, to put it bluntly, screwed them over in this whole thing, specifically their conference.
And I should add a little bit of background because I know we have some folks here who are interested but don't know the story. Basically, St. Thomas, actually like St. John's and Bethel, were the strongest teams in their conference, MEAC, which are these Minnesota teams. And there's more than one conference in Minnesota. But they were the stronger conference overall. And then finally, St. Thomas's success in all sports, it wasn't just football, led them. And Frank, I know you're an attorney. I'm an attorney too. I kind of at least appreciate the way they kicked them out. They redefined conference membership to basically include all the teams except St. Thomas. Like St. Thomas just was not going to be able to meet the new conference requirements. And of course,
clever lawyering here.
Yeah, but being out there, and JB, by the way, we have also a commonality. I'm also a Trojan, but
oh God,
fight on, baby.
Fight
yes.
on. Yeah,
all right.
Woo,
Yeah.
But all the USC fans woke up this last week for our call-in show. They were all dormant during the off season, but everyone started showing up for our Tuesday call-in show. But anyway, so they redefined it, and then St. Thomas simply was, I think, too big. And they've now, as you said, they're in the Pioneer Football League, which is non-scholarship D1 football, but then they're bringing all their other sports into another conference to be D1 because they just didn't see the benefit of moving up to Division 2. But yeah, it was just a total mess. Hey, Aaron, I know you've been patient. 1 second. I just wanted to say, while I was at that St. John's game, I sat next to longtime Minnesota sports writer Patrick Rios, and he voiced something that I've heard occasionally suggested that D3 might consider or should consider a split into the teams that give a damn about football and those who don't. That was his phrasing. What do you two think about that?
How do you do it? Because realistically, remember, you have how many sports in Division 3, and so it's not just a football division; it's a multi-sport division, just like the other ones. It's too late in the game to split into FBS and FCS. Realistically, there was an old approach that maybe there needed to be a Division 4.
Yep,
about 20 years ago. That went nowhere. There are state schools in this. There are service academies in this division. There are private public schools across the board. We get that. And it doesn't necessarily mesh well. But realistically, a private school in the heart of Texas is winning your championships, folks. And their enrollment is not 5 figures at that school. So I don't know what the need is to do something like that realistically. I get the whole, we want to win games 2 thing or win championships 2 thing. But again, only one team's going to win anyway, or maybe 2 if you do it that way. What difference does it make?
Yeah. I mean, and at the end of the day, too, it's funny, like the NESCAC doesn't participate in the playoffs, but they have so much money that if they really wanted to go in on football, like they could win national championships. There's just no way you can compete with that. I mean, these are multi-billion-dollar endowments, but they've made a decision to just sort of stick to their own thing, and so it is what it is. I think the way it's set up isn't perfect, but it's way better than pretty much almost any other division out there, in my opinion.
I had a conversation with an older Johnny's fan as I was heading to the game last weekend. And I said, this should be a good game. He's like, well, we'll do okay against one of these Division 2 teams, referring to Whitewater and the rest of the teams in the WIAC. And I just thought it was fun because I'm like, okay, this is the sort of D3 backhanded trash talk.
Oh yeah,
First of all, expect this
I've
as being a
I've talked
transplant in Minnesota.
I've talked backhanded about the WIAC before. They don't fit the typical D3 model. They don't. Let's be honest. But at the same time, hey, they check all the other boxes, and they've just made a focused effort in football. And so, what are you going to do?
Absolutely. Hey, Aaron, you've been really patient. We'd love to hear from you. What's up?
Hey guys, thanks for doing this. I have got to be honest, I had not heard about this before, and being a former D3 alum at Hardin-Simmons, I'm really excited to get into it and start listening to you guys. I might have missed this, so if you already talked about it, I apologize. But I'd love to hear some schools you guys see having a chance to maybe get their foot in the door who haven't. My Hardin-Simmons Cowboys keep getting knocked out by Mary Hardin-Baylor every year. So I'd love to hear some schools that you guys see this year who are kind of under the radar that we don't know if you're kind of not following deeply, but you guys think have a chance to have a good outlook this year.
I just want to state that I did forget to mention the Hardin-Simmons Mary Hardin-Baylor rivalry is one of the best out there. I attended it for the first time last year at Mary Hardin-Baylor.
Man, that was epic.
It is unlike any atmosphere I have been in, including Stag
Can I
Bowl.
Can I break some news, Frank?
Yeah, it's a little early, but go ahead. I know where you're going with it. Go ahead.
There's a rumor that a certain sideline guy who wears fancy, sparkly coats might be at the Hardin-Simmons game when they host Mary Hardin-Baylor in a couple weeks. It's a rumor, can't confirm, but if you want to see Frank in person, he might be in Texas in week 4. We'll see.
Moving right along, sleeper picks that Aaron wants to hear about. Essentially, Carnegie Mellon's got a lot to prove right now, Aaron, and I'm really excited to see how this game against RPI turns out when I attend it on Saturday, because they are that team that got scratched from the playoffs last year due to COVID, a first in our history involved with Division III football. We had never seen a game get scratched in the playoffs, but obviously these are different times we're in right now. So they've got a lot to prove, and they've got a lot of players back, and they could really be strong in the PAC this year, the PAC conference. There are pockets of teams throughout the country that may do well in their region, but I don't know about breakouts in terms of the national realm. I do say, though, as a whole, look at the Centennial Conference based on their performance last year and what they have back this year, because Muhlenberg, I think they're going to be very, very good, despite what happened on Saturday night. And Johns Hopkins has Ryan Stevens back as quarterback. He's just prolific and getting better. And Susquehanna has a whole crap load of talent back. Rusha is their quarterback, and he's going to do well this season. They've got a 3-headed monster there, and it is strong football. Obviously not just Pennsylvania-based football with Johns Hopkins and Maryland, but it is just strong overall football being played right now in the Centennial Conference. And I am interested to see how whoever advances does this year in the playoffs, because remember, Muhlenberg took Mount Union to overtime in Alliance in the quarterfinals last year. It was really a strong Muhlenberg team. They lost some to graduation, but they're still a strong team.
Yeah, I guess my pick, even though it might be a little easy to throw this out here, it could be Trinity. They got a lot of street cred when they took it to Mary Hardin-Baylor in the playoffs. If they can beat Wheaton this weekend and really establish themselves as a true top 10 program, maybe not a team that just happened to have a good game at the right time in the playoffs, that will elevate them into the national conversation in a way where they could potentially be a Final Four type of situation. We haven't seen that in a while. Right now, obviously, Mary Hardin-Baylor is the team to beat. North Central is coming online this weekend. They have a good game against Wabash. They're going to be in the conversation. But Whitewater, we don't know what's happening there. Maybe this year in the WIAC we see a team like La Crosse, who played North Central pretty close in the playoffs. They could be a team that sort of breaks through. We've seen over the last, it's been like, when did Oshkosh go to the Stag Bowl, Frank? Was that 2015 or
2016? It was the scratch year for Mary Hardin-Baylor.
Yeah, so I mean, it hasn't always been Whitewater, and so there could be teams in in the WIAC, like a River Falls, like
Lacrosse.
Lacrosse, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different possibilities. I'm trying to think of some other regions, maybe. Birmingham Southern has kind of become a thing. They have fared well and done. Yeah, I can't think of anything else right now, Frank. And nationally, like you said, regionally, it's kind of here and there, but at the national level, there's really only still a handful of teams left.
I got to jump in and say it's ironic you brought up Trinity, because I did see Tucker Horn, who is a pretty prolific player. Yeah, he's pretty darn good down there at Trinity. He was in here. I see another Horn that might be related to him in here. So, that QB is going to play a major influence on his team this season. And that Wheaton game is one to watch this weekend for sure, because it's going to tell us which one of those two teams is going to have the easiest pathway to a potential playoff run here. The loser obviously is probably going to need to win their conference out at that point.
Hey, Aaron, thanks again for that question. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys. You guys are great. And I love that you guys talk about the passion and the different environment of D3 and how it is still so much focused on just passion. You see in D1 how there was 30 coaches changes and almost 70 quarterbacks that change. And I heard you guys mention about, you hear D3 guys stick around and they love to play just because they love it. There's no money hunting. Yeah. And it's nothing wrong with it. Kids should take advantage of it. But I love seeing that passion still at D3. And it's something that for people who are tired of it at D1 and you want to see that passion and kids who just love to play ball because they love to play ball, D3 still got that at every level, anywhere you look in these regions.
Amen, Aaron. Amen. Thanks for that. One thing I want to say, if I can, Bobak, we want to send out our best to Trenton Duper, who is, or we'll still call him, is the quarterback at center. He has been off due to cancer that he's been afflicted by. Man. And he was going through his fourth treatment, I believe, late last week or early this week. Just want to send out our best to Trenton, because he's a special guy out there. We hope to have him on our show to talk about his journey soon. We kind of want to let him mend up from this, because obviously these treatments take a lot out of you, no matter how old you are. And for somebody at his age to be afflicted by cancer in that way is just horrible. But he's going to beat this. I'm pretty confident, and he's still very positive, and he appreciates all the love and support he's gotten from Division III folks out there. So if you think of it, send some love Trenton Duper's way.
Absolutely. I know we've only got a couple of minutes left. I just have a couple of quick questions. For all those years, the Stag Bowl was in Salem, and now it's been moving around. It's headed to Annapolis this season for Stag Bowl 49. That's, by the way, the title game for D3 at the end of the playoffs. And it's going to be in mid-December. I think it should be pretty good weather in Annapolis. I was looking that up. I think it's still like 40s and 50s is the high. Are either of you guys going to be attending that one?
Balmy.
Yeah, for there.
I have been on the sidelines since 2007. Why would I not be for this one in Annapolis? I have to make my way to at least 50, which is back in Salem next year. Salem was my home away from home in December for how many years in a row before they did start moving it around. So 49 at Annapolis and 50 at Salem. Yes, I will be on the sidelines in some way, shape, or form or another. And we will continue the Sparkle Man tradition to raise money for cancer awareness, actually, which is what we do ever since the death of Craig Sager, which happened on the night before the Stag Bowl a number of years ago now. I have worn an outfit in his honor, and the last few years raised money for cancer research and awareness by, sort of previewing what we're going to be doing on the sideline. Yeah, we are not a video broadcast on D3Football.com, but we still get to show it and talk about it, and folks seem to love it from the response we get from the crowds that pack the stands in Canton or elsewhere. So we appreciate that, and I appreciate it. For as much as people think I'm trying to show myself off, it's just a little added bonus here to give a little bit of attention to Division III and to a cause like cancer.
Absolutely. That's really important. As we're kind of starting to wrap up, the first question I wanted to ask is more for those who've been listening in and maybe finding this intriguing. For those less familiar with D3 and want to really check it out, what are some what would be your suggestion to them? How should they start checking out D3 games? What would be your approach to somebody who's less familiar with the division?
Go ahead, JB.
Well, I mean, the beauty of D3 with 240 schools scattered across the country, there might be a game in your backyard. Just go check it out. A lot of these colleges have been around for hundreds of years. There's a lot of great traditions. And even though it's a smaller, less pomp and circumstance as an FBS game, go check a game out in person and just experience that. Or the beauty of D3 too is that a lot of the games are online. You can watch however many screens you have, turn them on. I mean, obviously D3Football.com has been doing a great job covering the sport for about 20 years. And there's actually a good article that our friend Greg Thomas just wrote in the Around the Nation column, kind of comparing D3 to D1 FBS. Like, what are some of the differences? So if you're not familiar, you can read that and get up to speed. Watch our podcast, if you want to have a more video experience to everything. Tomorrow we'll be live at 9 a.m. Eastern. We're going to be previewing all the games of Week 2. We have a coach from Ithaca College, Coach Sherper from Ithaca will be on. He's got a big game. He just had his first collegiate win. And so there are a few content providers out there, but just go out to a game and really experience it. I really appreciated that Frank got me out to a game, because it's hard for me to go from Florida sometimes to these Eastern schools. But we went to a game last year between our alma maters, Union and Hobart, went into overtime. It was late October. The rain held off. It was a beautiful day. It was an exciting game. And really the passion and the love for football that these student athletes have is unparalleled. I went to USC. I saw Reggie Bush and Carson Palmer. It's a different deal. It's more corporate. It's almost like an NFL thing. This is a different experience. You can be right on the field. You'll feel it. The action is great. The athleticism of these players is top notch. Just get to a game. You'll really see what we're talking about.
I have nothing to add to that. That was perfect.
Yeah, that was absolutely. I remember how striking it is, especially I'd been to D3 games before, but again, after a big number 4 versus number 5 game, you see the game end, players, coaches, fans, media, everyone just goes onto the field and starts chatting, and it, it's like, all right, we wrapped it up, and everyone's just having a nice old time. And I've seen that at games across the country when I've had a chance to peek in. To wrap up, how do we find you two in your show? What are the best ways for those in the audience who want to check you guys out to track you down and the stuff you guys put out there?
We are especially available on Facebook and Twitter. Facebook, it's in the D3FB Huddle. Just look that up. On Twitter, JB runs the D3FB Huddle handle that you see up top. I'm at Frank Rossi. We will retweet each other quite frequently. What we use each for, we use our base shows, usually our Tuesday or Monday wrap-up show called Crunch Time on Facebook, and our Friday live show on both Facebook and Twitter when possible, when we have the bandwidth to do that. We have moved to something that really worked out fabulously last year for us. With all the interviews we wanted to do post-game with the games I'm able to get to, we post those now directly to Twitter the next morning and edit those down to try to get them to 15 minutes or less. But people seem to just love the fact that we've got these post-game interviews. Some of our most watched content is those on Twitter only. So, we would love to have a 2-hour show every week. It's just not feasible. Editing it would be a problem, and uploading it and everything else you have to do with this stuff. So we found different venues to post our content to, and doing the live show on Fridays is a lot of fun. A little bit of nervousness for me as a producer of it, but
yeah, Frank does the heavy technical lifting, and I get to do the fun stuff like the Instagram account, the Twitter account. But yeah, Frank was really, I mean, he's the co-founder of the show. Him and Eric Wren, who was an All-American at RPI, got this thing going. I was originally an annoying caller who eventually evolved into a co-host, and I'm sort of I'm the John Madden to Frank's Pat Summerall. He's the smart guy. I'm a little bit of the goofball, but at the same time, our partnership has really worked because, we work off of each other's strengths. Frank really understands the technology. And, I'll give myself a little credit. I think it was, 2016, 2017. I was like, Frank, we can take this to another level. And Frank figured out a way to get the technology and the video to do that, because as an audio podcast, you can only sort of do so much. But now with the video, and especially with social media and reels and all this other stuff going on, I feel like we've really distinguished ourselves by the product that we produce is different. And, I know that I haven't seen it for D2 or NAIA or whatever. So I'm very proud of where we've come. We've worked a lot of hours sort of behind the scenes. Thank God my wife understands and appreciates my passion for Division III, and she's a big fan of Frank's too. So I know that helps keep me out of trouble. But yeah, it's just been crazy to think we've been doing this for 15 seasons, and I think we've still got a few more left in us.
Jen Baker is awesome. I will say that right away. So Jen, thanks for letting JB be my co-host for so long. Bobak, I want to say one thing though too as we exit here, and JB knows this. Whenever I would see a retweet from Reddit CFB of some of our game day coverage with me on a sideline somewhere in the country, it's always like this really big honor. Even if ESPN had done it, it wouldn't be as much of an honor. And I swear to you, because it shows that we are able to get the notice, the content, the spotlight for these players out there in a way that we see at least 10,000 views of a video just because you guys retweet it. And maybe it's for funny reasons because it was a weird play, or maybe it's an incredible performance of some sort. But, you guys do inspire us to continue to do what we do on Saturdays as much as anybody. So thank you for kind of carrying our coverage out there during a busy FBS weekend in a lot of cases.
Well, thank you, Frank. I mean, you guys put out the content, and we just see great content. I always tell people, it's like, if it's good, we want to share it, and you guys do a great job of putting a good light on what's happening at Division III and how fun it is. Fun in the talent level, fun in the kind of zany level, and the things that make it, because it's college football. The funness that makes it college and the funness that makes it football. You guys both help bring that to people on Twitter and on Facebook through all of that stuff. So I just want to thank you both for joining us. Thanks so much, guys. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, well, let's do it again when we get closer to the playoffs. Let's go.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Bobak, for everything. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
So again, for those of you joining us, in the D3 Football Huddle is the weekly NCAA Division III East Region Football Recap Show hosted by Frank Rossi and James Baker. They cover all the season's weekly game results, interviews, and in-depth analysis of the 9 conferences in the East Region, but they also do Crunch Time, which covers key national games. I recommend you check that out if you have not. You've heard them both. They're fun to talk to. They're fun to listen to. I enjoyed it. So on behalf of myself, Bobak Hayeri, thank you all for listening. This was CFB Talk 71. We will catch you all later. And now I'm going to hang up and listen.